Chapter 12. It must have been close on to 1 o'clock when we got below the island at last, and the raft did seem mighty to go slow. If a boat was to come along, we was going to take the canoe and break for the Illinois shore, and it was well the boat didn't come, for we hadn't ever thought to put a gun in the canoe, or a fishing line, or anything to eat. We was in rather too much of a sweat to think about so many things. It weren't good judgment to put everything on the raft. If the men went to the island, I just expect they found the campfire I built and watched it all night for Jim to come. Anyways, they stayed away from us, and if my building the fire never fooled them, it weren't no fault of mine. I played it as low down on them as I could. When the first streak of day began to show, we tied up to a towhead in the big bend of the Illinois side and hacked off cottonwood branches with the hatchet and covered up the raft with them so she looked like there might have been a cave in at the bank there. A towhead is a sandbar that has cottonwoods on it as thick as harrow teeth. We had mountains on the Missouri shore and heavy timber on the Illinois side, and the channel was down on the Missouri shore at that place, so we weren't afraid of anybody running across us. We laid there all day, watched the rafts and steamboats spin down the Missouri shore and upbound steamboats fight the big river up the middle. I told Jim all about the time I had jabbering with that woman, and Jim said she was a smart one, and if she was to start after us herself, she wouldn't have sat down and watched no campfire. Oh no. Why, she'd have fetched a dog. Well, then, I said, why couldn't she tell her husband to fetch a dog? Jim said he bet she did think of it by the time the men was getting ready to start, and he believed they must have gone up to town to get a dog, and so they lost all that time, or else we wouldn't have been on the towhead 16 or 17 miles below the village. No, indeedy. We'd have been in that same old town again. So I said I didn't care what the reason was they didn't get us as long as they didn't. When it was beginning to come on dark, we poked our heads out of the cottonwood thicket and looked up and down and across. Nothing in sight. So Jim took up some of the top planks of the raft and built a snug little wigwam to get under in blazing weather and rainy, and to keep things dry. Jim made a floor for the wigwam and raised it up a foot or two above the level of the raft, so now the blankets and all the traps was out of the reach of the steamboat waves. Right in the middle of the wigwam, we made a layer of dirt 5 or 6 inches deep with a frame around it for it to hold in its place, and this was to build a fire on in sloppy weather or chilly. The wigwam would have kept it from being seen. And we made an extra steering oar, too, because the one of the others might get broke on a snag or something. And we fixed up a short stick to hang the old lantern on, because we must always light the lantern when we're out to see a steamboat coming downstream. That was to keep you getting run over. But wouldn't have to light it for upstream steamboats unless we was in the way in what they call crossing, for the river was pretty high yet. Very low banks being still underwater, so upbound boats didn't always run the channel, but they hunted the easy water. This second night we run between 7 or 8 hours with the current that was making over 4 miles an hour. We catched fish and talked, and we took a swim now and then to keep off the sleepiness. It was kind of solemn, drifting down the big still river, laying on our backs, looking up at the stars, and we didn't ever feel like talking loud, even if it weren't often that we laughed, only a low kind of a chuckle. We had mighty good weather as a general thing. Nothing ever happened to us at all. Not that night, nor the next, nor the next. Every night we passed towns, some of them way up on the black hillsides, nothing but just a shiny bed of lights, not a house you could see. The 5th night we passed St. Louis, and it was like the whole world lit up. In St. Petersburg, they used to say there was 20 or 30,000 people in St. Louis, but I never believed it till I seen that wonderful spread of lights at 2 o'clock that still night. There wasn't a sound there. Everybody asleep. Every night now I used to slip ashore around 10 o'clock at some little village and buy 10 or 15 cents worth of meal or bacon or other stuff to eat. And sometimes I lifted a chicken that wasn't roosting comfortable, took him along. Pap always said, take a chicken when you get a chance, because if you don't want him yourself, you can easy find somebody that does. and a good deed like that ain't never forgot. I never see Pap when he didn't want a chicken himself, but that's what he used to say anyway. Mornings before daylight, I slipped into cornfields and borrowed a watermelon, or a muskmelon, or a pumpkin, or some new corn, or things of that kind. Pap always said it weren't no harm to borrow things if you was meaning to pay him back sometime, but the widow said it weren't anything but a soft name for stealing, and no decent body would do it. Jim said he reckoned the widow was partly right, and Pap was partly right. So the best way for us was to pick out three things from the list and say we wouldn't borrow them anymore. And he reckoned it wouldn't do no harm to borrow the others. So we talked it over all one night, drifting along the river, trying to make up our minds about whether to drop the watermelons or the cantaloupes, or the mushmelons, or what. But toward daylight we got all settled satisfactory, and concluded to drop crabapples and persimmons. We weren't feeling just right about before that, but it was all comfortable now. I was glad it come out that way too, because crabapples ain't ever good, and the persimmons wouldn't be right for another 2-3 months yet. We shot waterfowl now and again that got up too early in the morning or didn't go to bed early enough in the evening. Take it all around, we lived pretty high. The 5th night below St. Louis, we had a big storm after midnight, with a powerful thunder and lightning, and the rain poured down like a solid sheet. We stayed in the wigwam and let the raft take care of itself. When the lightning glared out, we could see a big straight river ahead and high rocky bluffs on both sides. By and by, says I, "Hello, Jim, looky yonder." And it was a steamboat that had killed herself on a rock. We was drifting straight down toward her. The lightning showed her very distinct. She was leaning over part of her upper deck above the water, and you could see every little chimbley guy clean and clear, and a chair by the big bell with an old slouch hat hanging off of it when the flashes come. Well, it being away in the night and stormy and also mysterious-like, I felt just the way any other boy would have when he saw a wreck lying there, so mournful and lonesome in the middle of the river. I wanted to get aboard her and slink around a little and see what there was there. So I says, "Let's land on her, Jim." But Jim, he was dead against it at first. He says, "I don't want to go fooling along no wreck. We's doing blame well and better than blame well alone, and as good as the book says. Like as not, there's watchmen on that wreck." "Watchman, your grandmother," I says. "There ain't nothing to watch but the Texas and the pilot house. Do you reckon anybody's going to risk his life for a Texas and a pilot house in a night such as this, was likely to break up and wash off down the river any minute?" Jim couldn't say nothing to that, so he didn't try. "And besides," I says, "we might borrow something worth having out of the captain's stateroom. Cigars, I bet you. Cost 5 cents apiece, solid cash. Steamboat captains is always rich, gets $60 a month. And they don't care a cent what a thing costs, as long as they want it. Stick a candle in your pocket. 'Cause I can't rest, Jim, till we give her a rummaging. Do you reckon Tom Sawyer would ever go buy this thing? Not for a pie, he wouldn't. He'd call it an adventure, that's what he'd call it. And he'd land on that wreck if it was his last act. And wouldn't he throw style into it? Wouldn't he spread himself, nor nothing? Why, you'd think it was Christopher Columbus, discovering the kingdom come. I wish Tom Sawyer was here." Jim grumbled a little, but give in. He said we mustn't talk any more than we could help, and then talk mighty low. The lightning showed us the wreck again just in time, and we fetched the starboard derrick and made fast there. The deck was high out here, and we went sneaking down the slope of it to the larboard, in the dark, toward the Texas, feeling our way slow with our feet, and spreading our hands out to fend off the guys, for it was so dark we couldn't see no sign of them. Pretty soon we struck the forward end of the skylight and clumb onto it, and the next step fetched us in the front door of the captain's door, which was open, and Jiminy, away down through the Texas hall, we could see a light. And all in the same second, we heard a voice, more than a voice. They were down yonder. Jim whispered. He said, He was feeling powerful sick and told me to come along. I says, all right, and was going to start to the raft, but just then we heard a voice wail out and say, oh, please don't, boys. I swear I won't ever tell. Then another voice, pretty loud, says, that's a lie, Jim Turner. You've acted this way before. You always want more than your share of the truck, and you've always got it, too, because you swore you didn't tell if you didn't. But this time you said it just one time too many. You're the meanest, treacherous hound in this country. By this time, Jim was gone for the raft, and I was a-biling with the curiosity, and I says to myself, Tom Sawyer wouldn't back out now, so I won't either. I'm going to see what's going on here. So I dropped on my hands and knees in the little passage and crept aft in the dark till there weren't but one stateroom betwixt me and the cross hall of the Texas. Then, in there, I see a man stretched out on the floor, tied hand and foot, with two men standing over him. One of them had a dim lantern in his hand. The other one, a pistol. This one kept pointing the pistol at the man's head on the floor and saying, I'd like to, and I order too. A mean skunk. And the man on the floor would shrivel up and say, oh, please don't, Bill. I ain't ever going to tell. And every time he said that, the man with the lantern would laugh and say, Deed you ain't. You ain't never said a truer thing than that. You bet you. And once he said, hear him to beg. And yet if we hadn't got the best of him and tied him up, he'd have killed us both. And what for? Just for nothing. Just 'cause we stood on our rights. That's what for. But I lay you, I ain't going to threaten nobody anymore. Not just this Jim Turner. Now put up that pistol, Bill. And Bill says, I don't want to, Jake Packard. I'm for killing him. Didn't he kill that Hatfield just the same way? Don't he deserve it? But I don't want him killed, and I've got my reasons for it. Bless your heart for them words, Jake Packard. I'll never forget you as long as I live, says the man on the floor, sort of blubbering. Packard didn't take no notice of that, but hung up his lantern on the nail and started toward where I was, there in the dark, and motioned for Bill to come. Well, I craw-fisted as fast as I could about 2 yards, but the boat was so slanted I couldn't make very good time. So to keep from getting run over and catched, I crawled into a stateroom on the upper side. The man came a-pawing along in the dark, and when Packard got to my stateroom, says, Here, come in here. And in he come, and Bill after. Before they got in, I was up in the upper berth, cornered, and sorry I come. Then they stood there, with their hands on the ledge of the berth, and talked. I couldn't see them, but I could tell where they was by the whiskey they'd been having. I was glad I didn't drink whiskey. But it wouldn't have made much difference anyway, because most of the time they couldn't have treated me because I couldn't breathe. I was too scared. Besides, a body couldn't breathe and hear such talk. They talked low and earnest. Bill wanted to kill Turner. He says he'll tell, and he will. If we was to give our both of him shares to it now, it wouldn't make no difference. After the row and the way we've served him, sure as you're born, he'll turn state's evidence. Now you hear me. I'm for putting him out of his troubles. So am I, says Packard very quietly. Blame it, I sort of begun to think you weren't. Well then, that's all right. Let's go and do it. Now hold on a minute. I had my say yet. You listen to me. Shooting's good, but there's quieter ways of doing the things that gots to be done. What I say is this. It ain't good sense to be courting around after a halter if you can get what you're up to in some other way that's just as good. At the same time, you don't risk no necks. Ain't that so? Well, you bet it is. But how are we going to manage it this time? Well, my idea is this. We'll rustle around and gather up whatever pickings we've overlooked from the staterooms and shove for shore and hide the truck. Then we'll wait. Now, I say ain't going to be much more than 2 hours before this wreck breaks up and washes down the river, see? He'll be drowned and won't have nobody to blame but himself. I reckon that's considerable sight better than killing of him. I'm unfavorable to killing a man as long as you can get around it. It ain't no good sense. Ain't no good morals. Now, ain't I right? Yeah, I reckon you are. But suppose she don't break up and wash off. Well, we can wait the 2 hours anyway and see, can't we? All right, then. Come along. So they started, and I lit out, all in a cold sweat, and scrambled forward. It was dark as pitch there, but I said in a kind of hoarse whisper, Jim! And he answered up right at my elbow in sort of a moan. And I says, Quick, Jim, it ain't no time for fooling around and moaning. There's a gang of murderers yonder. If we don't hunt up their boat and set the drift there, drifting down the river so these fellows can't get away from the wreck, the one that they're on, there's going to be in a bad fix. But if we find their boat, we can put all of them in a bad fix, for the sheriff will get them. Quick, now hurry. I'll hunt the larboard side, you hunt the starboard. You start the raft, and I'll... Oh, lordy, lordy. Raft. There ain't no more raft. She done broke loose and gone. And here we is.